Hello, everybody. Welcome to New and Dangerous Opinions, brought to you by the Providence Post, providencepost.com. I'm your host, Derek Peterson. Today is February 7th, the year of our Lord 2026, and we're joined by my good friend and brother in Christ, John Brisson of We've Read the Documents. John is a fantastic researcher, given much of his life, many, many years and hours to research, especially the finders and some of these other groups. John's actually in the process or finishing up writing a book right now. Have you finished that book yet, John?
Not yet, still working on it.
It's going to be great. Everyone's looking forward to it. The finders, John's going to get into it with us. He's probably the foremost expert or one of the foremost experts on this topic of the finders. I thought it would be appropriate considering all the Epstein talk recently, to remember that Epstein isn't the first that's been involved in these sorts of intelligence operations using children to blackmail and entice various powerful people for money and power. So, John, how are you doing, brother?
Doing well, Derek. Thank you for having me on, brother. Glad we
Thanks
can
for
finally
coming
stream
on.
together.
Yeah, I
Thank you.
appreciate it. And so, John, give us the basics of the finders. When it started, how it started, who all was involved, and kind of
Yes.
go from there.
So the Finders, roughly as a network, started in the 60s, and it was founded by Marion David Petty, who was from Virginia, who entered the military through the Army Air Corps, around and during World War II. And he went up the ranks and ended up eventually chauffeuring for one of the Army Air Corps brass members, Henry Hap Arnold. And through his connections to the United States military industrial complex, he ended up purchasing property, which would be known as the W Street Apartments, within Washington D.C. during that time period. Now he claims that he got it, and eventually he bought large areas of land in Virginia called the Free State. We'll talk about that more when we talk about the counterculture movement. But he said he got the money to purchase all this property during that time period from poker games that he was playing with other, fellow chauffeurs and stuff like that when he was in the Army Air Corps. I don't believe that to be true at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so he ended up working with Charles Marsh, who was a famous newspaper media elitist, to be able to get all his connections and the purchasing and the financing for the property. And he opened up, like I said, the W Street Apartments, where government officials and people within the military would come and stay at his apartments, and he would gain intelligence from people passing through as being traveler buys, right, and stuff like that. And so that's kind of where I believe that he got brought into the fold. Where later, he attended intelligence training school in Germany towards the end of his military career. He was also Jesuit trained as well too towards the end of his military career. And he, upon being released, where the story is he requested his release and was given a release from the United States military and no longer had any official capacity working with the United States government, if you believe his story, right? He then, kind of started the Finders within the 60s, in Virginia, and still owning those apartments in Washington, D.C., and opening up and advertising for people to stay both in this large tract of land called the Free State, where people could come and move to and live in Virginia, as well as people moving through the W Street Apartments. And through there, he started bringing in people into this group he called the Finders, which some people say a cult. It's a cult, and it is a cult, but I look at more as a network, a way of bringing people in, compromising them, gathering intelligence, through various places that he owned and properties that he owned and people that he would set forth or what he calls games, where he'd call a game and members of the finders would go talk with someone or influence someone or gain intelligence about someone or bring them into the fold, into the network,
Hmm.
right? And that happened from about the early to mid 60s up until about Petty's death, which the network had dwindled by that time after the 1987 incident, up until the early 2000s.
It's interesting. They always have some super sus way of getting money out of thin air, don't they? I mean,
Yes.
nowadays they use it through banking and stock stuff or crypto, and it's that's how they it seems to always start from that, right? That source of illegitimate money to create these power hubs from which they can kind of launch attacks against good people. Um, okay, so what do they do with those apartments? You said they bought up a bunch of apartments in DC. What were they doing with those?
Yeah, they bought up two generally in the same area, but later he would buy up more. And in those apartments with which investigative journalists Lynn Bracken and oh, I forgot the other guy's name. He's passed away. I'll see if I can get his name, and you'd probably recognize it. He was pretty famous. They interviewed Petty in the mid to late 90s about what he was doing at those W Street apartments,
Hmm.
and the finders would live there. Later, they would buy a warehouse in the DC area. They'd also buy a warehouse in San Francisco. They'd buy property all over the globe, which is very similar to Epstein, right?
Hmm.
And they would circle back and forth between Virginia, the warehouses, and the W Street apartments, right? But they would bring people in, which Petty said himself, for intelligence gathering, because intelligence was currency to him, right? The
Hmm.
more he could find out about a person and the more that they could confess to him, the greater power he thought that he had,
Hmm.
right? Which is screams of intelligence. It screams
Hmm.
of CIA and Mossad, right?
Hmm.
Um, and they would also bring people in to see if they could bring them into the finders. They would bring people in to blackmail them through compromat, especially at the warehouse where John Stitcher, now deceased, he died in the early 90s, who was a Washington Metropolitan Police Department detective, was calling out and honestly believed the finders, who they got raided many times by the Washington Metro Police Department before the 1987 incident in Tallahassee,
Hmm.
were shooting child pornography in the warehouse.
Hmm.
And so there's also a document from the early 90s where a police officer pulled over a finders member in one of their iconic Dodge vans that they would drive outside of the warehouse. And he said that they were babysitting children there, but they pulled him over at night and there was kids being seen at night playing around the warehouse when most of the kids had been removed after the 1987 incident. The main finders group kind of fell apart. So
Hmm.
whose kids were they?
Yeah,
And that they were
that's
and they saw limos, with diplomatic plates driving in and out of the warehouse at the time, right? And the cop even said this is a previous area in his report that was being investigated for child pornography.
the warehouse was.
Correct, yes.
Wow.
So, they were using their properties for intelligence gathering, for blackmail, for degeneracy, um, pretty much for everything. And
Compromise. So it's very similar to Epstein.
very
Sounds
much
a
so,
lot like
yes.
Epstein.
Very much so, yes. Um, the only difference I would say is members of the finders did have their own children, which were the children that were you know, uh, found and brought in by the Tallahassee Police Department in 1987. That's a common misconception in conspiracy culture, is whose kids were those kids? Well, it was the parents of the finders. It was their children. Um,
Right.
Now, those children I don't think were molested. I have no proof. Dr.
Hmm.
Moore, who did the sexual examination of two of the children. He's deceased now. And his report was inconclusive. And Jordan Arico, the oldest girl, has said in an interview that she was not molested as a child.
Hmm.
But I do believe, based off of my evidence, that they were abused and neglected. There was mental abuse and physical abuse, but no sexual abuse to my knowledge of
At
those
least that they,
specific
at least that
children.
they could, at least that they could remember. Maybe they were traumatized out of forgetting, you know,
Correct.
um,
Um,
or brainwashed
yes.
out of forgetting. So yeah, that's the famous incident. Um, yeah, just refresh what happened in that incident in Tallahassee for those who don't know.
Yes. So Sydney Myers, who was someone who was in that Tallahassee park as a concerned citizen, called the Tallahassee Police Department on February 7th, 1987, that there were children at the park who were disheveled and dirty looking in the back of this van. And there were two men that were there that were dressed up in suits. And she found it very odd. It was a very odd scene to her. As anybody looking at it and looking at the pictures of that time would come to that conclusion if you were an average person, right? You would have been like, what's going
Hmm.
on here? You know? The Tallahassee police arrived to the scene. They interviewed Finders Network members Douglas Edward Ammerman and James Michael Hallowell Jr. And they acted very erratic. They weren't answering the officers' questions. Um, One of them planked. They kind of went limp and kind of wouldn't do anything. So they ended up arresting them, which would have been, if James Michael Hollowell would have been like, hey, you know, I'm Jordan's stepfather,
Hmm.
and shown proof, none of that probably would have happened, or at least it would not
Right.
have gone as far as it did, right? But they did no cooperation with the police whatsoever.
Hmm.
And in doing so, they brought both men in and the children as well, too, to the Tallahassee Police Department.
Interesting. Maybe they were afraid those police wouldn't be on their side or something, and so they kept quiet till they could be in friendlier company. Um,
Yes.
yeah, that's wild. So it sounds a lot like the Epstein stuff. So you got child trafficking, you got child rape, you got extortion, you got information gathering of all sorts. Um, and so when did it end? How did it end?
Well, Douglas Ammerman and Michael Hallowell were released. I would have a couple of months after February 7th, when charges were dropped against them.
Hmm.
The mothers of the children who were part of the Fighters Network met with law enforcement down in Tallahassee, as well as the prosecutor. And the head prosecutor was Willie Meggs, who I had a conversation with, and he was a Bible believing born again Christian, and was still outraged out of what had happened as far as the case being dropped. Was still like, yeah, they were up to no good when I talked with him.
Hmm.
And he the case was dropped, charges were dropped, the children were returned to their mothers. Some of those mothers and children's left the network, like Jordan Arico's mother, Paula Arico. They had to stay in Florida for a certain amount of time before custody was given back to her, and they left the network, to my knowledge. It wouldn't have anything to do with it after that, to my knowledge. Okay. And so after that, it was still going on. We have that report about the warehouse with Washington Metropolitan Police in the early 90s, right? Later in
Hmm.
the mid 90s, some of the members of the Finders sued Marion Petty in court in Virginia to try to get some of their money back, because money was pulled in. When you joined the Finders, money and property that you had was given to Marion Petty in control of him, controlling it as something they called the invisible bank. Okay.
Hmm.
So by that lawsuit, Marion Petty had millions and millions of dollars of land and money that he was being sued for. Okay. Which the members of the Fighters Network that sued for it did not receive any compensation to my knowledge. And I tried to get access to those records out of Culpeper, but I was not able to do so because the court case had been so many years. They had destroyed the records
Hmm.
since then. And then, the Fighters kind of broke apart. And Marion Petty died in the early 2000s.
Was this connected? Everyone remembers, like under, or some people remember, like under Bush. Remember the Washington? I think it was the Washington Post published the articles about kids being brought in and out of the White House and things like that. Was this any connection to that, or do you know?
I
Or
have no direct connection between the Finders and the Franklin scandal, even though there have been allegations that people have said in the past, but there is no direct connection to my knowledge. And if anybody has it, we read the documents at protonmail.com. I'd love to see them. I've been searching for a long time, but I think they were two separate rings
hmm.
that were happening and occurring around the same time, even though the Finders predates Franklin.
Hmm. Who was running this operation? Was it the usual suspects, CIA, Mossad? Was it just some rich, powerful people? Who was involved in this?
I believe that it was the American military industrial complex, the United States Central Intelligence Agency, and the Israeli Mossad as well as you could say the Vatican through Jesuit interests and Petty being Jesuit trained. But yeah, the CIA, because that was the investigation. There was a technological company called Future Enterprises where they were training CIA agents how to use technology and computers, which was relatively new technology during the 1980s, right? And the
Oh yeah.
Finders did have a lot of that kind of. I've heard back and forth discussions that the technology they really had was not advanced, and some of the technology they did have was advanced at the time. But they were communicating back and forth through computers and closeted message boards, and each of the locations had satellite antennas and computer systems and stuff like that, and everything for the
Hmm.
intelligence and receiving of telexes and everything at that time. But anyway, the Finders were training through Future Enterprises at the warehouse CIA agents to use computers. And I've been able to prove this. This was something that was not previously completely fleshed out and was denied by the United States CIA, but they can't deny with the evidence that I have now and interviews that I've done. It's pretty conclusive. All right,
Hmm.
that's what was going on. So we do have CIA agents being placed there at the warehouse to receive training, maybe compromise as well too, right? Because of what was going on at the warehouse as far as the shooting of child pornography,
Hmm.
etc. And then so that was a direct CIA tie to the Finders. That was dismissed and was dismissed when the case was reopened back in the mid early 90s, around 1993, 1994, by United States Congressman Tom Lewis out of Florida, who I think was legit, and my congressman out of the Cumberland County area, Charles Rose, who I do not believe was legit. Very strong counts for national policy ties with Charles Rose and everything, and that's a whole nother discussion.
Hmm.
But I think he was there to torpedo the reopening of the case, where Tom Lewis actually left uh, uh, being out of Congress right after the opening of everything and kind of how it went south and nothing ever happened from the reopening of the case. And he was replaced by who was the congressman that got in trouble with the foot touching underneath the homosexual
Lindsay.
scandal.
Lindsay Ladybug Graham.
No, it wasn't Graham. He got caught with like
Oh, I know who
underneath.
you're talking about. Yeah, that freak. Who was that? Was it not Hastert? Who was it?
No,
Yeah, look that up. I remember that. That was it was like at a bus station or something, I think, right? Or some or train station.
no, it wasn't Larry Craig. Larry Craig. There was another scandal that happened afterwards. I'm sorry,
Anyway,
uh,
the
but it
homosexuals in Congress
but there was another
are hard to
scandal
keep
that was
track
in
of.
Florida. Let me see who replaced Tom Lewis. Let me type that in real quick. Uh, there's a lot of scandals, by the way. So sometimes you end up
They all run
kind of
over. Yeah.
they all run over together. Yes. Mark Foley. Mark Foley. So it's
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Mark Foley scandal. Yeah. So anyway, I think Tom Lewis was legit. I know that I don't think that Charlie Rose was. And so from there, you have direct CIA ties, and you have also Marion Petty's intelligence and military background. It still went up until his death. And then the Mossad ties are allegations that was put forth by investigative journalist Charles Solka, as well as Jonathan Pollard being mentioned in the FBI vault drops of Marion Petty and very heavily redacted,
Documents.
releases that
Hmm.
was talking about the investigation and connections between Jonathan Pollard and Marion Petty. We just don't really know what they were.
Mm. Yeah, Pollard would never do something like that, I'm sure. Um,
But
it's
yes, yeah,
okay though. Don't worry. Mike Huckabee let him off.
yeah,
Let him go.
that is true.
Thank you, Mike, for all you do for America. I mean, Israel. Um, so let's get into the beliefs. You said it kind of became like a new agey sort of a cult, like a cult type thing. What did they, it sounds a lot like Scientology, the way they manipulate people, get them to confess stuff or talk and things like that. Scientology sounds a lot more successful. But what did they believe, these people, this cult? Where was it based? You said Culpeper, Virginia is where it was based out of?
Yes. Culpeper, Virginia, which you have 666 state route running through Culpeper, Virginia or nearby, right? Which is very
Yeah,
interesting to tie.
I used to live right there, right on 66, right on
So you
66.
had you had Culpeper, Virginia, and Nethers, Virginia was the general area
Hmm.
around the Shenandoah River Valley area.
Mm-hmm.
Hundreds and hundreds of acres of land. But anyway, um, I want to go back to Mark Foley just for a quick second. It was over.
Yeah, go ahead.
It was a page scandal with inappropriate text messages. That was with Foley. So I just want to, just go back and make that note. It was not the under the leg,
Oh, really? Is
bathroom
that full? It
incident.
was okay.
But anyway, you mentioned Hassard. You know, uh, Hassard was the one who demanded Foley's expulsion, but Hassard was involved in his own, serial child molester scandal later, right? It's like, oh,
Right.
they're all in on it. But anyway, um, can you ask me the question again? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go off
What
on.
was the theology? What were
Oh,
the
yeah,
belief
yeah.
systems of this cult?
So they kind of put forth like a do what thou wilt mentality, which was like one of their slogan was like do what thou wilt and then minimum guilt, maximum freedom. So it was a very Luciferian mentality. Anything was welcome except Christianity.
Hmm.
So was any, Buddhism, Hinduism, New Age practices, theosophy, all of that was okayed by the finders except for born again Christianity, which they were very strongly against. Charles Sokol writes a lot about that, and I agree with him. They mainly put forth New Ageism and counterculturism as a way to corrupt society and push people away from God. But
Kind of
there was
like
no dedicated religious system within the finders, other
okay,
than you
so it
can say
was basically
Luciferianism.
right. It was kind of just the belief system of the 60s, I guess, and 70s, this hippie stuff kind of thing. Um, yeah, that's interesting. And anything else you can think of that would be good to talk about on the topic?
I
You're
mean,
the
maybe some of
expert.
the finders' connections to certain people. So one of the big ones that I talk about and someone who I've done a lot of research on, among others, like John Kleizak, the author of School World Order, we worked on together, is Barbara Marx Hubbard. The founding of the World Future Society, which Marion Petty was a founding member with um, uh, Roy Mason, who was a pedophile, homosexual futurist and architect, who would later do the architecture and the drawings, futuristic architecture for the World Future Society, and Edward Cornish, who Marion Petty was really good friends with Edward Cornish. And so they helped found the World Future Society, which is I believe to be the replacement for the World Economic Forum. World Future Society member Herman Kahn was the mentor for Klaus Schwab, the former president of the World Economic Forum.
Hmm.
And they kind of have an anti-Malthusian human potential stance, which human potentiality, as part of the New Age movement, where humans believe that they are God or little gods, and they believe through human potential, right, that they can overcome any problem. Humanity can solve any problem that's put forth in front of them, right? So it's kind of against Malthusianistic belief, where you had to have limits to growth, you have to reduce human population, and you have to conserve the environment and everything, which is kind of like what the World Economic Forum and the
Hmm.
United Nations would put out, where the World Future Society would kind of discuss some of those things, but they would also be like, okay, well, we need more people that aren't Christian, because the Christians are selfish and they'll hold us back, right? But
Hmm.
we need enough people, which is very similar with Elon Musk's natalism belief,
Hmm.
to be able to solve the problems, right? If we have enough people, that we can go to space and we can seed the stars and we can have free energy and all this longevity, live forever nonsense. That's what they push. So the World Future Society steered modern day beliefs through the co-option of science fiction, through Gene Roddenberry and Star Trek, where we get a lot of space communism and seeding
Hmm.
of stars and med beds to heal people and stuff like that, that we see being pushed forth in the QAnon operation right now, where people literally think they're going to be healed by advanced technology and med beds in the future. Being pushed through Star Trek and Gene Roddenberry. You have Isaac Asimov, both him and his son being pedophiles, through iRobot and kind of the Asimov's laws of robotics, right, in the modern day robotic movement. He was a World Future Society member. Neil deGrasse Tyson was a World Future Society member.
Hmm.
A lot of people don't know that Al Gore is a futurist. He's also a World Future Society member as well, too. Former Vice President of the United States, Al Gore Jr. Um, Maury Strong, who Alex Jones used to point to as the Soros before Soros. He used to harp a lot, was a good Canadian businessman and oil tycoon who was, one time Undersecretary of the United Nations. He was a World Future Society member. So you have a lot of powerful science fiction writers, a lot of powerful, even technocrats. Ben Goertzel was a World Future Society member who Epstein had funded, right, for his Sophia the robot. A lot of kind of like science forward thinking people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, all these people being against Jesus Christ and against Christianity, um, being a part of this group that separate themselves from the rest of the kind of World Economic Forum elitists,
Hmm.
right? And so Barbara Marx Hubbard helped fund that. Was a major player to it. And Jonas Salk, who was a member of the World Future Society, said that Barbara Marx Hubbard did more with his vision of the world, okay, through the Jonas Salk Institute, which is purely about eugenics, purely
Hmm.
about, even dysgenics, you could say, kind of both, weirdly enough. Scientism, I guess, is another, or experimentalism is another better way of looking at it, where he was the inventor and the propagator of the polio vaccine, but still wanted to experiment on humans so that they could um, pretty much hack longevity and live forever, right?
Hmm.
And he said that Barbara Marx Hubbard did more to complete his mission than the polio vaccine, the Jonas Salk Institute, and his entire work ever did.
Hmm. So through her theosophic teachings
Yeah.
and the amount of influence she had, which has infected a lot. But so again, that ties back to the finders. That's kind of that the finders that grew out of the finders is what you're
Yeah.
saying, or
Marion
they were
Petty
funding.
worked directly with her to form the World Future Society, and the finders would work directly putting up her syncons or her synergistic conferences together, working directly with Barbara Marx Hubbard throughout the 70s and the 80s together
Hmm.
very closely. Um, and Barbara Marx Hubbard, her maiden name being Marx. Now Hubbard isn't L. Ron Hubbard; it was a different Hubbard. Okay, and she
Right.
actually left her husband and her family. She abandoned her husband and her family. The peak of feminism, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
According to her, because she was the new Eve, Derek. That's what she called herself. All
I've
right.
seen pictures of her. She's no Eve.
she left her family and her husband to have an adulterous affair with Jonas Salk.
Hmm.
Okay. Her father was Louis Mark, who was a financier for the Bush family. Okay, that's how
Hmm.
much money he had. He funded the Bush family with the Harrimans. Okay,
Hmm.
funded them. He founded Louis Mark's toy company that used to sell their toys in Sears Roebuck catalogs. For a lot of your boomer audience, they might remember that. Okay,
Hmm.
back in the day, right? So she's just not some crazy loon. She comes from a very elitist and well-connected Jewish family.
Right.
And a lot of people just discount her because she says crazy new age out there things, but
A
there
lot
were
of people believe it. I mean, there's a lot of. I mean, Alex Jones, you just
yeah,
mentioned. I
she's
mean,
a disciple of Barmarks Hubbard. Yep.
he obviously believes the same stuff. Elon Musk, all these. I don't know what Peter Thiel believes, but I know he wants to live forever because he knows what's waiting for him on the other side. Um,
He
all
gives
these
her
people.
same alternative to Armageddon. That was her thesis for her book, the alternative to Armageddon. He gives that same, and I've compared both of their talks on Armageddon, that it doesn't have to happen the way the Bible says it does. Now, get this, you're going to find this interesting, and you're going to find this heretical, and it's going to make you mad. Hillsdale College, the famous conservative college in the 1980s, and a
Hmm.
lot of Christians went to Hillsdale College, okay,
Does, yeah,
and
yeah.
conservatives, right? They had Barbara Marx Hubbard give a talk about her idea of the New Testament and Revelation in the 1980s.
Gross, gross. Even if she was born again Christian, I would still find it gross for a woman teaching Bible.
Yeah, agreed.
But um, yeah, theosophy is a definite problem. We'll get into that in other videos. I want to try to stay focused on these finders, folks. Um,
Do you want to talk
and
about
so
Hunter Patch Adams? There's a lot of people know
yeah,
about Patch Adams.
go into that the movie with Robin Williams you're
Yeah, so
mentioning.
they used to wheel the card in with the VHS back in my day, and they would put Patch. I've seen Patch Adams so many times when I was a kid and adolescent, it's not even funny. But the story that Robin Williams portrays of Patch Adams isn't the really story of Patch Adams, which is crazy. Okay, so
Hmm.
Hunter Doherty Patch Adams, his connections to the Finders was he met and knew Marion Petty very early on within the 70s, okay? And Petty supposedly gave him a land grant and money to help start his nonprofit hospital that never really came to fruition, even though it's been going on trying to build up for decades in Virginia, called the Gesundheit Institute. Um,
Gazoon type,
yes,
like as in
Gesundheit.
sneezing.
Yes, yes.
That's weird.
For years, and so it never came to fruition. Now, there's allegations that were put forth against Hunter Patch Adams. Not really gonna go to them in depth here, but there are allegations about the Gesundheit Institute as well. Hunter Patch Adams was very intimately involved with the Finders. I consider himself to be a member of the Finders and directly had a very strong relationship with Marion Petty and other members of the Finders. Um,
Hmm.
they I talk about it in the book how they called the Finders were called the Crazies, and Hunter's group was called the Zanies. Okay. And there were allegations back and forth of which group was um the ones that dealt with child pornography and child trafficking and molestation and rape parties and orgies and stuff. I believe it was the Finders. I write about that in my book. I believe that it was them and not Hunter Patch Adams group selectively. But Hunter Patch Adams, very interestingly enough, he developed like clowning therapy for doctors, right? And he would
Hmm.
put forth these clowning conferences in the USSR, during that time period within the 80s, getting access to the USSR and throwing conferences during that time period where it was very difficult to get in
Hmm.
during the 80s. And so he was running though, it was crazy. The first one was actually done in Russia. The first clowning conference in worldwide history was done in Russia. And he, interesting enough, Marion Petty, one thing they talk about when the State Department was investigating his passport, had passports and documentations from North Korea, Vietnam, and the USSR.
Hmm. Yeah, that's pretty sus. That's definitely spook city there. That doesn't happen naturally for a doctor. What do you think he was doing with this medical stuff? What was the objective? Was he trying to get researching people or psychological operations or something on sick
I
people,
would
or what was the
I would
objective?
assume it was all a combination of all of that, yes, and a pushing of new age practices on people as well too.
Hmm. Um, so I guess they could influence, they could compromise people, and then have them help push their New Age religion, this theosophy. I mean, it's surprising how many people are into theosophy in
Yeah.
politics. It really, even if they don't know they are, a lot of them are. The famous one with Mike Flynn reading that. What was the prayer from? Was it from
Elizabeth Clare Prophet's Universal Church
Elizabeth
and
Clare?
Triumphant.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if he's really like a member of the Theosophical Society.
Mhm.
He probably just thought it was like in the Bible, and he's just like, kind of a fake make believe type Christian guy. Well, he's Catholic, so he's not a Christian, but
Mhm.
he's probably a fake Catholic even. He just thought it was some prayer, that he kept in his wallet, but I don't know. What do you think about that?
You and I discuss it frequently. My belief is based off of things that he said. I do believe that he is a theosophist. Now, you can have full theosophical beliefs and not be part of the Theosophical Society. They're called world
Right.
servers. I used to be one. So that is my guess is that he does hold those beliefs because he does believe in a false coming great awakening, right?
Yeah.
And so so he kind of pushes that kind of, theosophical worldview and narratives that's kind of playing into the future, right?
Steve
So,
Bannon definitely is, I would say. I
oh,
mean, he,
1000%, yes. I mean,
yeah,
he studied, theosophy and went into a theosophical bookstores in Europe when he was in naval intelligence, so
right, right. I mean, maybe he got out of it. I don't know. You were in it too, like you said, and you got out of it, but I don't see any signs of that. Um,
no, and he considers himself to be a Catholic, which again, like you said, Bannon does.
I think he's Orthodox. Did he say he's Orthodox? I think he says he's.
Catholic to my knowledge, but unless that's
I don't know.
changed.
I don't know.
Um,
They all just, you know, Catholic and Orthodox are so easy to LARP because it's so memeable. I think it's what people grab onto because it's easy to post on the internet,
yeah,
whereas like, real Christian faith isn't like we don't have statues and figurines and saints and things like that like they do. So I think it's much more memeable. And so it does become like a trendy thing, I guess.
yes.
Um, all right, so back to the finders. So anything else you can think in that department? So
I would
how
say
many
that
children? How many children you think were affected by that? Where were they getting the children from anyway? How do they obtain these children? That they,
there's telexes from okay, so that's a complicated question. I don't really know. Um, I do know that um they would go to bus stops and recruit kids that were traveling, some of them being in their mid-teens that ran away from home.
mm-hmm,
And they would bring them in, and like I said, that they would bring them to the W Street apartments, and of course, if they, participated in orgies, without even giving illicit drugs, that would still be statutory rape, right?
mm-hmm,
So, but there were women that were overage that some of them wanted to participate in degenerate acts that were not coerced by drugs or by pressure,
mm-hmm.
for the orgies. But, there are a lot of children that go missing every year and runaways and stuff like that and everything. And a
Yeah.
lot of them are found, to be fair, but that is my guess. You also have telexes of the selling of children to China, for example, that Ramon J. Martinez, the United States custom agent, had found and was listed in his detailed report, right? So I don't know for sure where the children were coming from, and I don't know exactly how many children were involved in the shooting of child pornography and human trafficking and stuff like that. But I do believe there is enough evidence that that was going on, including compromise as well too. Now, I will say this, something that I've always said, and I'm not gonna make direct allegations of who was involved. I think Marion Petty was probably involved with the majority of it, obviously, as the head of the network.
Mm-hmm.
Not that like the groups or the people above him, but him being like the head from the Finders network itself, right?
Mhm.
And then, but there was, Theodore, Gerald Reese, was, many years later busted and convicted and sentenced for having child pornography, who was a member of the Finders, right? And he served prison time for that.
Hmm.
So, um, he's one that I know for sure, obviously, is a pedophile because he's a convicted pedophile.
Did they have like a Ghislaine Maxwell that was going around rounding up kids, or was it just
No,
more haphazard?
um,
Yeah.
no, it would be various people through the group. There
Hmm.
was no single, person that I know of, that I could point to.
What are some of the famous people that were implicated in it? The powerful people that were implicated in it that
So some of
famous?
the powerful people that were implicated in it would be, Barbara Marks Hubbard, obviously, Hunter Patch Adams. Another would be, Wavy Gravy. If we're talking about from the famous like counterculture movement. Another would
Hmm.
be Norman Mailer. You have kind of like that beatnik generation and the beat generation that was heavily involved with it as well too. That a lot of people, might go back, kind of like realize as people that were involved. Robert Schwartz, who was kind of like this big business leader that used to hold these big business conferences at the Terrytown Conference Center, where if you actually look into Robert Schwartz, he was a pretty like well-connected dude that most people have never. That's the thing about the Finders is a lot of the people that I talk about because it's a different time, like Dick
Right.
Dabney, Robert Schwartz,
Yeah, no one knows their names now,
most
but they
people are
were
gonna be
a big,
like,
big thing. Yeah.
Kenneth Keys Jr., which was a huge new age futurist author that was pretty famous during the counterculture movement. Most people are gonna be like, "Who are you talking about?" Mildred
Right.
Loomis. They're gonna be like, "Well, these people aren't famous, John. Like, who, like what?" But it was a different time, you
Right.
know. So that's what kind of separates everything from it.
Yeah, it's probably a lot harder to get records now. We're not probably going to get anything like the Epstein files, even though it's obviously incomplete and massively redacted from this. So I guess nobody, as is usual, nobody actually went to jail for this network or the child crimes or anything else, then, did they?
Not directly from the snow.
Yeah.
I mean, you did have Theodore Reese go to prison, but that was only years later for being caught with child pornography. But not
Hmm.
directly. And I talk about how like you could say like the 60s and 70s drug culture, the beat generation, kind of like the deschooling movement through Jesuit what was his name? He was a famous deschool, I have to get his name. He was a Jesuit. He's a famous deschooler um type
What's
push.
a what's a deschooler?
So a deschooler, some of it could be, and I'm not against homeschooling, okay?
Hmm.
But kind of that push from a progressive liberal side
Hmm.
was kind of framing the deschooling movement from kind of like a conservative libertarian Christian side. It's known as the homeschooling movement. They're technically the same thing. The deschoolers would just be more free association with it, where the homeschooling movement seems to be more faith based, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And then you had the Esalen Institute, the Human Potential Movement. Um, you had the Finders working directly through you had a lot of Chinese students staying at the W Street apartments through Georgetown University.
What were they doing there?
Um,
What was their
we don't know.
relation?
We don't know, but we know that they went there very often. When the W Street apartments got raided, they had a Georgetown Chinese anatomy student staying there.
Hmm.
We don't know. The School of the Living, Rainbow Gatherings, a lot of your Werner and Erhard seminar training and stuff like that. Like a lot of that new age, human potential, movement and stuff like that, headquarters, specifically around the Finders.
Hmm. Did they have property internationally, or was it all
They
in the
had
U.S.?
international property, yes. They had
They did.
property in so they had property in the United States, they had property in DC, Virginia, and California, but they also had property in Florida, London, Tokyo, Paris, Moscow, and Hong Kong.
Hmm. So it was a pretty big network. They own property in Moscow in the
Yes,
80s. That's wild.
they did.
Interesting. Um, and so it kind of shut down. You said in the early 2000s is about when it shut down.
After Marion Petty died, yes. However, Kristen Noth, who is a member of the Finders Network, she still wrote for futurist publications even after that. You know, a lot of the
Hmm.
Finders can still be found. A lot of them, you know, still write for kind of like a human potential futurist, you know, organizations and stuff like that and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, Petty was also very much involved with the National Press Club in Washington D.C.
Hmm.
It had press credentials and stuff like that and everything through the national. It had an office in the National Press Club as well too. Um, but which you know, there was interesting enough. One of the Finders members, he wrote a book called Bureau of Spies, which talk about various intelligence groups working through the press corps and working through the National Press Building, including Germany, Soviet Union, Japan, and the United States Central Intelligence Agency. But Steve Usden, who's a member of the Finders, didn't discuss his deep connections to the National Press Club and Marion Petty's deep connections to the National Press Club. He left
Hmm.
those parts out.
Interesting. And so did it evolve into anything or it just shut down? Like,
I believe it shut down. Some people say because of a late 2010s advanced reality or alternative reality game where the Finders were brought up kind of when a lot of those ARGs were being run by Discordians during Cambridge Analytica 1.0 during the
mm-hmm.
2015, 2016. Excuse me, and even after that election, like Fault Cicada 3301, for is another example, there was a Finders ARG that was run out of Pelsner, South Carolina, where one of the person posted was supposed to be Finders member Stuart Miles Silverstone. I don't believe it was because he's in his late 80s and early 90s. And he lives in California, and I really don't think it was him, my knowledge of him.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And he just does not have that capability to shoot all of this stuff and put it on YouTube at his advanced age and his
Right.
poor health, right? In Elgin, South Carolina. But I mean Pelzer, South Carolina, I'm sorry. But he that was that some people say that's a continuation of it. I don't think it is. I think it was just it was people, they're pushing forth conspiracy to the masses, right? And so that was one way to get millennials during that time period and kind of get them on the QAnon operation, which you kind of see them overlap. You'll see a lot of QAnon operation people kind of say that that was done by the Finders and stuff like that and everything with no knowledge of the case, right?
Right.
And kind of, you know, bring them into kind of like that QAnon operation type thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, not to say there wasn't any truth in Pizzagate and Podesta and Alphonsus, you know, need to be investigated and stuff like that and everything. But during that time, you had all these mini operations being run to get people on board to vote for Trump. And I think you and I are in agreement on that
Oh yeah.
from what we've seen.
Yep.
So, you know, but I think that ARG was a part of it, you know, and so, you know, I'm going to,
What is ARG? What is ARG?
it's an alternative reality game or advanced
Oh.
reality game is another way of saying it. So what it is it's an interactive game that a person through internet websites and social media like YouTube videos and stuff like that and everything and podcasts and stuff, they can gain knowledge by solving a puzzle with various clues and stuff like that.
Mm.
So they can kind of figure out something.
Oh, I see.
Okay. Which is kind of like what the
Kind of
QAnon
like the
operation
Q
is.
chart stuff, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And so there's quite a few of them throughout history. Some of them were just stopped, you know, but there've been there's a YouTube channel called Night Mind that's dedicated to ARGs. A lot of them are promotional, a lot of them are works of so-called art, you know, modern kind of
Mm-hmm.
postmodern art, you know. But a lot of them have horror themes in it and stuff like that. None of them are Christian. Not a
So
single one
this,
of
so this, so this, so this, you don't think this was a continuation of
No,
of the finders then.
no.
Okay. So the finders, when did Franklin happen? Was that around the same time or was
It
that
was
overlapping?
it was around the same time, yes. Franklin went a little bit later, but yes.
Yeah. So you don't think there was a direct, you think that was just a separate operation,
I
basically?
believe they were parallel and there probably were crossovers, but those crossovers have never came across them.
Right.
Because the finders existed before Franklin did.
Right. A long time before. Sounds like. When did Franklin start? That was 70s, right? Or 80s?
Late 70s, early 80s, up until the late to 80s, mid 90s,
Yeah.
early to mid 90s.
All right. Anything else you can think of, John, on the
Um,
finders?
no, I think that's really about it. I got about 350 plus pages written over 1,000 sources. I've tried to write the definitive expose
Work.
on the finders.
Yeah.
The finders, none of them will talk to me.
Yeah. They don't like to talk.
Um,
Bad guys
um,
never want to talk to you. That's the fact. And
I
it's
do
something about
believe
it.
there is a possibility, and I hold hope that Finders member Robert Gardner Terrell, in his last days, did become born again.
So he might confess at some point, you
He's
think?
dead. He's dead.
Oh, he's dead. Okay. So he's not
Um,
going to confess
correct, but
to us.
I do believe that that is possible based off of some of the things I've read and some of the things that I've come across, and I hope that did happen. All glory to God. I hope it is true. But outside of that, none of them will talk to me. And one last thing, is something that I've talked about off and on, but I've not written about yet, is I have heard on high confidence through unnamed governmental sources that they were investigating serial killer like murders and murders of pastors by the Finders Network. But there's not enough people that I can talk with to give me enough actionable
Hmm.
information to publish that in depth.
Hmm.
But do I believe it to be true? Possibly, yeah.
Where do those pastors get killed? What states or towns were
In
they in?
the states, I don't have any towns, but the areas that they were looking into was the Virginia, West Virginia, uh, Kentucky area.
That's local. Maybe some of their congregants were talking or they were talking. Um, all right, well that's great, John. I appreciate all the research you do. I know it's not rewarded as it should be for researchers like you
My
doing all
gift's in
this
heaven,
work.
brother, just like yours is,
Yep.
so
We don't see a lot of fruit in this world.
nope,
We
nope.
get the exact opposite is more the case. The but it's great, all those kids that were abused and probably murdered at some point. Um, they deserve justice too, just like, all these Epstein kids deserve justice. And it's sickening when people just don't seem to care, just want to go on with their life or just post some stuff online and forget about it and just go on with their life. So it's great that you're doing this research. Um, and I can't wait to see that book when it comes out. So
Thank you
thanks
very much.
again, brother, for all you do. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you for having me. God
Good
bless
talking with you.
everyone who's listening.
You
Bye,
too.
dear.
Take care, bro.